All right. Well, I think we can go ahead and begin. We have some introductions and stuff at the beginning. So if folks join later, that's no problem at all. So just wanted to start off by saying, Miigwech, thank you so much for attending today. So thankful for you guys to be here. And we've been working so hard on this report. So we're just grateful to be able to share with you all. Just wanted to cover the agenda for today. So we're going to start with introductions, like I mentioned, Native Farm Bill Coalition and report background, diving into gaining ground, and then at the end, we'll have an opportunity for question and answer. And I don't believe that I had a chance to introduce myself, but Bojo, Mary Belzuk, Nadejnikos. My name is Mary Belzuk. Hello, thank you for attending today. I'm over communications at the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative, and we are the research and policy partner for the Native Farm Bill Coalition. So again, thank you for joining today, and we'll get started with introductions. I'm running the slides and they're wanting to be a little finicky for me, but that's okay. So I wanted to introduce Erin Parker. She's one of the co-authors and she is the executive director at the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative. So Erin.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mary Bell. Thank you all for joining us today. The Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative is so proud to be the research partner to the Native Farm Bill Coalition. Today, we are very, very excited to share with you Gaining Ground, which is a policy analysis document that our team put together that looks across all 12 titles of the Farm Bill, looking at opportunities for Indian country in each one of those titles. We named the report Gaining Ground for a couple of reasons. Of course, we wanted to honor the work and the progress that tribal nations saw in the 2018 Farm Bill, and with 63 tribal specific provisions included in the final legislation as a result of some hard work by the entire Native Farm Bill Coalition and all now over almost 300 members of the Native Farm Bill Coalition. We wanted to also look forward to future opportunities like those that are outlined in the report for 2023 and beyond. And not least, we wanted to acknowledge the extraordinary importance of tribal control of tribal lands, which is something that we support every day at IFAI and the work that we do across Indian country with tribal governments. I also just have a few brief words of gratitude before we begin. I want to thank everyone involved in this report. This policy report really spans, as I said, all 12 titles of the Farm Bill with opportunities in each critical area that, if enacted in 2023, would support food security, tribal sovereignty, economic development, rural development, and natural resources stewardship through Farm Bill programs and opportunities. But to build that report, our team didn't just look at past Farm Bills and do research on our own. We also worked with incredible partners across Indian country and incorporated opportunities that have long been identified by our partners for Indian country in the Farm Bill, including the Intertribal Agriculture Council, the National Congress of American Indians, and the Intertribal Timber Council, just to name a few. We were supported in this work, of course, by the entire Native Farm Bill Coalition team, and we are deeply grateful to our friends and our colleagues at all of those organizations, as well as the leadership of our NFBC co-chairs, Vice Chair Cole Miller of the Shakopee, Mdewakanton, and Sioux community, and the IAC's Executive Director, Carrie Jo Lawrence. None of this work would have been possible either if it hadn't been for the financial support and the leadership of the Native American Agriculture Fund, the Shakopee, Mdewakanton, and Sioux community, and Mazon, a Jewish response to hunger. Without NAF's commitment to continuing the work that began in 2017 with Shakopee's strong investment in the Native Farm Bill Coalition, and without Mazon's continued stalwart allyship, the opportunities outlined in this report would not exist. So from everyone at IFAI, I express my deepest gratitude. Thank you for trusting us with this work and for joining us today to hear a little bit about 2023 and opportunities for Indian country in this huge piece of federal legislation. With that, I will pass it over to our Associate Director, Carly Griffith-Hotvet.
Thanks, Erin. Osio Nagata. My name's Carly Hotvet. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and the Associate Director here at the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative. And as Erin said, we're proud to be the research and policy partners for the Native Farm Bill Coalition. In addition to all of the great partners that Erin had mentioned, our funders and supporters, I also want to give a shout out to our Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative staff. John Van Poel, our Director of Policy and Governance, Joseph Damaso, our Policy Liaison, Will Seeley, our Tribal Enterprise Specialist, Kelly Case, our Staff Attorney, Summer Wilkie, our youth programs coordinator, of course, Mary Bell Zook, our communications manager, and Christiana Kotu, our graduate student who assisted in this. And I also want to give a shout out to Britton, Nikki, and Cindy, our administrative staff who put up with us as we all work diligently to complete this report and get all the content put in and make sure that it was arranged in a manner that was going to be accessible for everybody. Just really want to make sure that we're acknowledging the hard work that was done on this, and in addition to the work that our partners were able to provide as well. It was really a collaborative and group effort, distilling the information that we receive from our stakeholders and translating that into the policy format. So we're very proud of this report. We're very proud of the information contained therein. And we're hopeful that we'll be able to be just as impactful, if not more impactful, through this Farm Bill process as a result of the release of Gaining Ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin and Carly. Now I wanted to turn it over to the Native Farm Bill Coalition co-chair, Carrie Jo Lawrence. She is the executive director at the Intertribal Agriculture Council. So I just wanted to give Carrie Jo the floor for a little bit.
Wonderful, thank you. My name is Carrie Jo Lawrence, and I serve as the executive director of the Intertribal Agriculture Council and co-chair of the Native Farm Bill Coalition. I'm so proud of the work that we have completed thus far, compiling the issues of tribal producers and tribal leaders. And we have been brought to our attention as the top agricultural priorities and recommendations offered in this important and informative report that will serve as a go-to resource for some of the most pressing Farm Bill related issues in Indian country, including Alaska. For more than 3 decades, the Intertribal Agriculture Council has pursued and promoted the conservation, development, and use of our ag resources for the betterment of our people. It is in this role the IAC provides customized direct engagement to Native producers and their communities, and as a result, has developed a keen understanding of how the Farm Bill, until recently, largely left out tribes and many tribal producers from meaningful participation in USDA programs. Accordingly, IAC advocates for policy changes based on lived experience of those we serve. In order to not only improve tribal agricultural food systems, but also support economic development and cultural preservation, changes must occur in federal policy that support tribal self-governance and tribal self-determination in order to develop more efficient and effective tribally driven food systems. The capacity, capability, and room for expansion already exists for tribal agriculture. Currently, there are almost 80,000 individual American Indian and Alaska Native farmers and ranchers producing a multitude of different food products on nearly 59 million acres of land. The Native Farm Bill Coalition and its partners are committed to advocating for change that removes barriers for tribes and tribal producers that are engaged in agriculture. This report is the first step in securing more tribal provisions in the next Farm Bill reauthorization, but it is not where the coalition's efforts end. We will remain actively engaged with the tribal leaders, tribal organizations, and tribal producers to ensure all of our stakeholders are informed during all phases and processes, all the way through implementation. We will remain in touch with our stakeholders as USDA begins holding consultations and listening sessions, and then finally enacting the regulations, where we will stay fully engaged to make sure the intent of each provision is enacted and that these changes reach the tribes and the tribal producers on the ground. And we are so proud of the rollout and all of the participation that has taken place and all of the efforts. And it's a heavy lift, and we are so proud that we are able to do this work and to be engaged with the producers that we serve. And thank you for being here, and thank you for all of the hard work. Thanks.
Appreciate it, Carrie Jo. Next, I want to highlight Native American Ag Fund, and Whitney is actually going to step in for Tony. She was unable to make it today, so I wanted to just give Whitney the floor to just touch a little bit on NAF and their support for the Native Farm Bill Coalition and this report. We wouldn't be able to do it without our great supporters. So just want to turn it over to Whitney for a little bit now.
Thank you, Mary Bell. And I know I speak for Tony and your extending our appreciation for letting us join on this press conference today. The Native American Agriculture Fund is proud to be a sponsor of the Gaining Ground report alongside the Shakopee, Mdewakanton Sioux community in Mazon to support the work of the Native Farm Bill Coalition in advancing Indian country agriculture policy priorities for the 2023 Farm Bill. This will be an essential resource in building on the historic impact from the 2018 Farm Bill. And so we want to extend our congratulations to the entire Native Farm Bill Coalition team and their partners in this combined effort. So thank you for having us today.
Thank you. Now I'm going to toss it over to Mia Mazone.
Thank you, and congratulations to all our colleagues on this call. As a national anti-hunger advocacy organization, Mazone is incredibly proud to align with tribal leaders, intertribal organizations, and other Native advocates of the Native Farm Bill Coalition in celebrating the vision in this report and in preparing for the work ahead. There's just so much power in self-determined food systems, and this agenda-setting report really showcases the reality that Indian country has the solutions and they're already happening. And the federal government has an opportunity and an obligation to play a key role in listening, respecting, supporting, and leveraging those efforts. We've seen through the Native Farm Bill Coalition that when tribes and Native communities are seen and heard, they can be very successful at demanding a self-determined and food sovereign future. And Mazone is very excited to continue our longstanding support of the coalition and many Native partner organizations in the space, and to use our advocacy voice to lift up Indian country calls for food security. We joined the coalition in 2017 as the first non-Native ally organization, and Mazone stands ready today again to roll up our sleeves and to get to work on advocating for the Gaining Ground's food and ag and nutrition priorities in the next Farm Bill. So thank you for the privilege to partner with you all.
Thank you so much. Okay, now I want to bring on Carly and Aaron to begin the presentation and just go over a little bit about who the Native Farm Bill Coalition is and then get into the report. So Aaron, I'm going to toss it over to you now.
And I'm on mute, so I will unmute myself. How many times have we all done that over the last several years? Thanks a lot, Mary Bell. I appreciate it. Thanks again for everyone for joining. I want to talk a little bit about the Native Farm Bill Coalition. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we would not be here today had it not been for the Shakopee, Mdewakanton Sioux community, who really stepped up in a huge way in 2017 and commissioned a report called Regaining Our Future, which I'll talk about in a second, that our team authored back in 2017. With the release of that report, which outlined a ton of opportunities for the 2018 Farm Bill for Indian country, we put together the Native Farm Bill Coalition. That's how the group was born. That was a joint project of not only the Shakopee, Mdewakanton Sioux community, but also the Intertribal Agriculture Council, the National Congress of American Indians, and our organization, Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative, as the coalition's dedicated research partner. We produce educational materials, policy analysis, and research opportunities like the one that we're talking about today, and the report in 2017, Regaining Our Future, that started it all. But we don't do that alone as our organizations. We do that with the support of over 200 member tribal nations, along with over 15 intertribal organizations and ally partners like Mazone, A Jewish Response to Hunger, who all came together back in 2017, speaking with one voice for the first time from Indian country on agricultural policy opportunities for Indian country in this significant piece of federal legislation. There's really no piece of legislation like the Farm Bill when it comes to federal food and agriculture policy. But unfortunately, if you look at the history of the Farm Bill going all the way back to the 1930s, you don't see a lot of Indian country inclusion, if any at all, in a lot of those early Farm Bills. That's really started to change over the last 30 years. But the most significant change was unquestionably in the 2018 Farm Bill, with those 63 tribal specific provisions advocated for by member tribes in the Native Farm Bill Coalition, by the organizations like IAC, NCAI, and the Shakopee, Mdewakanton Sioux communities team, looking at ways to enhance tribal sovereignty, grow food security, develop economies, support rural development, and take care of natural resources, all from an Indigenous-led perspective. That had really never happened before. And the Native Farm Bill Coalition has really helped as an organization to make those things possible. So that's a little bit about the coalition and a little bit about the report and work that we've done previously as IFAI, the coalition's research partner, talking about all of these opportunities in this legislation across all 12 titles of the Farm Bill. Don't worry, we're not going to keep you here to talk about every single one of those 12 titles in detail today. We're going to let you take the report with you digitally and look over the 136 pages that cover recommendations for Indian country in the 2023 Farm Bill. But that's a little bit of background on the coalition itself and on the reports that we have as well. And I think with that, we can probably get into talking about the over 150 Indian country policy priorities that are in this document for the 2023 Farm Bill. I've said this list of things a couple of times, and that's not an accident. We can really kind of group all of these policy priorities in the report into 5 major pillars, talking about how the Farm Bill can support food security, tribal sovereignty, economic development, natural resources stewardship, and rural infrastructure development, all for Indian country in this one piece of legislation. That's how significant this is. It's really huge. So we're going to go through each of these 5 pillars in a little bit more detail, just to let you know some of the highlights of the report in these particular areas. But of course, we won't hit all over 150 priorities, so we'll leave those for you to take home and view the report. We'll start with food security. And of course, when we talk about food security and we talk about the Farm Bill, we can't do that without first and foremost going to the nutrition title, which is Title 4. That's where several of the big opportunities you'll see in gaining ground to support food security through Farm Bill changes in 2023 are going to happen. There's really a lot of overlap as well between the concepts of food security and this pillar that we're going to be talking about, and ways that the Farm Bill can promote tribal sovereignty as well. So when we talk about the biggest opportunities in the food security arena, we're also talking about tribal sovereignty because we're talking about 638 authority. That's self-determination or self-governance compacting that comes from a law that has existed since the 1970s, but was actually never applied to USDA until 2018 in the 2018 Farm Bill. 638, just in case anybody on the call is unaware, is a really incredibly strong acknowledgement of tribal sovereignty. It enables tribes to take over delivery of programs, services, activities, functions of federal programs, but to use federal dollars to deliver them directly to their citizens, which often encompasses a lot more opportunities to tailor programs to better serve their citizens. It also means that tribal governments are able to take those dollars and often stretch them farther than the federal government would be able to do, because they know their own people and their own community and needs and resources better than the federal government ever could. So you'll see across the history of 638 quite a bit of cost savings. So applying that to USDA for the first time in 2018 was incredibly significant. And one of those places in 2018 came in the nutrition title with a self-determination contracting opportunity for food sourcing in the Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations, or FDIPR. So one of the things you'll see included in the report is the call to expand and make permanent that 638 opportunity, which today is enabling tribal governments rather than the federal government to make decisions about what kinds of food should be sourced for the food distribution program on Indian reservations. So that's really acknowledging tribal sovereignty, acknowledging that historical role that tribal governments have always played in making sure that their citizens were served and that they had access to culturally appropriate, traditional, healthy food. So not only will you see in the report an opportunity to expand self-determination and self-governance for FDIPR in the 2023 Farm Bill, but really for all Farm Bill nutrition assistance programs. And that includes SNAP as well, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. You'll see the report highlighting the need for tribal administration of SNAP. Tribes are not currently eligible to administer SNAP, but there are over 25% of American Indian and Alaska Native people in the United States today who rely on SNAP monthly. And that was even before the pandemic greatly impacted food insecurity across Indian country. So SNAP is a really significant part of the food security safety net for Native people, but tribes are not eligible currently to administer it. The 2023 Farm Bill could change that and close that gap. Similarly, tribes are also not eligible to administer TFAP, or the Emergency Food Assistance Program, which is a really critical program in times of emergencies, whether those are global health crises or natural disasters, or as many tribal communities have experienced recently, both at the same time. Those things frequently happen. When those things happen, they frequently impact tribal citizens and Indian country disproportionate to the rest of the population. So making sure that tribal governments have the opportunity to head critical safety net programs during those times of emergencies is a key priority. Broader than that, in the food security arena, is just food access, and specifically to traditional, culturally appropriate, or tribally produced foods in all USDA food assistance programs. That's a significant opportunity that the Farm Bill offers. And the report offers multiple pathways that could happen in the 2023 Farm Bill. That includes things like tribal exemptions from some burdensome statutory or regulatory requirements that often keep tribes from being able to offer tribally produced food to USDA food programs. It also includes expanding cooperative agreement or self-governance authority, as we mentioned with 638. All of those changes would help make sure that traditional, culturally appropriate, tribally produced food can come from tribal producers to tribal citizens through USDA programs, which not only supports the health and food access for tribal citizens, also provides some economic development opportunity at the same time. Food security really goes beyond food assistance, though. Whether we're talking about food security or nutrition security, the key in that phrase, we want to get to that security, right? But in order to do that, we have to establish long-term, stable food systems in partnership with agricultural producers who are able to access fully the kinds of programs and financial support from USDA programs that help them thrive in their businesses and also feed their communities at the same time. So in that context, when you look across all of the 150 plus recommendations that are in this report, really all of those, whether they're supporting directly a tribal producer or they're here in the food assistance arena, those are really all furthering food security at the end of the day. The other thing about food security is that a good way to further that you'll see in the report is full-throated support for tribal sovereignty through the Farm Bill. And with that, we can jump over to the next slide and talk about our second pillar, which is tribal sovereignty. You will see 638 authority, of course, here as well. 638, as I mentioned, finally applied to USDA in 2018, but it also applied not only in the nutrition arena in FDIPR, but in the forestry title, where there's another self-determination contracting opportunity for tribes through the Tribal Forest Protection Act. Unfortunately, despite this historic accomplishment, these programs are both demonstration projects currently. That means that if they are not extended or expanded in the 2023 Farm Bill, then they have the potential to go away. So the report, of course, discusses expanding, making permanent both of those authorities that already exist in the 2023 Farm Bill, but the report doesn't stop there. There's a significant opportunity here in the 2023 Farm Bill for Congress to strongly acknowledge tribal sovereignty across USDA programs by applying 638 authority broadly to everything that it can at the department. So that is another thing that you'll absolutely see in the report. And along with that, there are some practical considerations as well, because to truly realize the potential of 638 application to USDA really needs some staff. Currently, the contracts that are administered through the 2018 opportunities are done in conjunction with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, because USDA doesn't have contract support specialist staff who have that knowledge and authority to understand 638 contracts. But that could change in the 2023 Farm Bill. If 638 were expanded, USDA also needs to build a house for staff to have the power and the authority and the ability to work with tribes to enter into those agreements across USDA authorities. So that's another recommendation that you'll see in the report. And that's something that the department has already committed itself to. USDA included that both in its action plan, its equity action plan, and in an announcement from Secretary Vilsack in November of 2021, committing all of USDA to expanding tribal self-governance and self-determination. But there need to be some statutory changes to really make sure that that opportunity becomes a reality. And so you'll see several of those in the report as priorities. You will also see things beyond 638 because 638 isn't the only opportunity to expand tribal sovereignty or enhance tribal sovereignty in the Farm Bill. You'll also see the expansion of alternative funding arrangements or AFAs through natural resources programming, and Carly will cover those in a second, so I won't steal her thunder. You'll also see expanded cooperative agreement authority for USDA, particularly at AMS or FNS. You don't normally think of cooperative agreements like they're a self-governance tool necessarily, but we've seen some recent examples at USDA of how those authorities can actually be pretty flexible and help make sure that tribally produced food that is healthy, that is either traditional or culturally appropriate, can make its way into USDA programs, providing both a market and economic development opportunity for Native producers at the same time that it's supporting food security, and doing that through the vehicle of tribal sovereignty. One really good example right now is the Local Food Cooperative Agreement Purchasing Program at USDA, where tribes can actually contract directly with USDA through a cooperative agreement to use federal dollars, buy tribally produced food, and make sure that that food gets to tribal citizens through social services programs, whether that's an elder care program or a program like the food distribution program. There are many opportunities, but that's a good example of how an expanded cooperative agreement authority could also accomplish that food access goal through tribal sovereignty as well. And all of that not only enhances food security and tribal sovereignty, it also promotes and leads to economic development, which is another pillar of the recommendations that are included in this report. And we can go to, yeah, you were already there. Thank you for catching up to me. I've mentioned economic development several times already in the context of food security and tribal sovereignty. And there are so many places across the Farm Bill where there are those opportunities to improve food security and acknowledge tribal sovereignty at the same time that we're creating a market opportunity for Native produced food products. But I don't want to take up all of the airtime, so I am going to pass it over to our Associate Director, Carly Griffith-Hotbed, to discuss some more economic development opportunities that are included in the report.
Great, thanks, Erin. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Access to credit is a huge issue in Indian country, and you'll see from the slide that Indian country is frequently referred to as a credit desert. And there's a few reasons for that, but some of the most predominant ones that we hear about from our tribal stakeholders and our Native Farm Bill Coalition members are challenges with really the USDA through FSA and through guaranteed private lenders, understanding some of the challenges and nuances when it comes to being a producer in Indian country. And accessing credit can be a challenge due to just the lack of knowledge surrounding what the reality of the situation is when it comes to our Indian country producers. And a lot of times that looks like challenges with collateral. The way we hold land can be very different from what a lot of these lenders or service providers are not comfortable with, but familiar with, and being able to not perceive that negatively from a risk management perspective can be really critical. So that looks like, finding alternative collateralization options or making alternative documentation assessments because of the way that we hold land. That can look like extending the length of, or having more flexibility for a loan term length in order to be more considerate of income flow and cash flow challenges that we experience in Indian country. We tend to be a little more rural. We tend to be a little bit more remote. We tend to have a harder time accessing certain locations and infrastructure from an industry perspective just because of distance. Or because of lack of availability of services within Indian country in our communities and reservations. And so a lot of the provisions that are contained within the Gaining Ground report are reflective of those dire needs for access to credit to bring additional parity to Indian country and help our tribal producers continue to get a leg up and additional access. This access to credit discussion is not new and it's not novel. We know through the Keep Siegel lawsuit and the settlement ultimately resulting from that there are continue to be challenges with USDA service provision to credit opportunities for Indian country producers. And the Gaining Ground report especially is considerate of that perspective and really wants to make sure that these policy recommendations are reflective of things that can change to really support and deliver on that federal trust promise that the federal government has to our tribes and our Indigenous producers. The one success that we saw when it came to the credit title in Indian country for the 2018 Farm Bill was a GAO report that was commissioned to do a review of credit availability in Indian country. There were quite a few continuing policy priorities that were contained within the 2018 Regaining Our Future report that were transferred over to the Gaining Ground report, and we continue to see a need for those, which is why they were included. And one of the ones that we think would be particularly impactful for economic development as well is the Tribal Advisory Committee that was authorized by the 2018 Farm Bill. That has yet to be seated. So we will continue to ask for that Tribal Advisory Committee to be seated in order to better advise Secretary Vilsack and other USDA staffers at the agency level about how these programs are working, about how they interface with BIA and other federal programs, and how we can really streamline the approach for accessibility and workability of existing USDA programs and any new programs that may come through or come forward through the 2023 Farm Bill, about how they can be best adapted or best developed to serve Indian country. The Tribal Advisory Committee is really intended to be made up of our subject matter experts, both in the field with direct experience or also a background in agriculture or program administration from that perspective. So we encourage that TAC, as we like to refer to it, to be seated, to be better, have a better ability to influence and advise USDA of the ways that those programs and sub-agencies can really bridge that gap to serve Indian country. When we're talking about economic development, we also want to make sure and highlight that a lot of our tribes and tribal producers have had a lot of success in product development. And we know that getting those products into not only domestic markets, but international markets can really be a critical value added option for tribes and tribal producers that are looking at, expanding their market share or providing additional opportunities to get those products to market. And so we want to make sure that USDA is seeking inclusion of trade reps in Indian country for these trade missions that have come out. And we've seen some successes with that. And we know that the Intertribal Ag Council's food programs have been great at facilitating access as well. And we want to continue to see that. And I won't steal anybody at IAC's thunder who may be wanting to talk about that, but that's a fantastic program. We have seen some tribal representation in international trade delegations when it comes to indigenous products being included. So we want to continue that. We want to see more support from that perspective, because that's definitely an economic development component there. So you heard Aaron talk a little bit earlier about 638 self-governance, self-administration opportunities. There are a variety of methods that can really encourage better flexibility, not only for self-administration of USDA programs when it comes to serving tribal populations or a tribal government actually administering those programs within their own, under their own umbrella. But I also want to point out that while that serves as a vehicle for economic development, there are also additional flexibilities that can be considered that this Gaining Ground report really supports, and we continue to share with our Indian country stakeholders. Every single program at USDA is eligible for a waiver. A waiver gives tribes the flexibility to make changes to the way that that program is administered or seek or negotiate opportunities to make that program better fit their needs, especially if the way the program was developed, maybe it wasn't necessarily as considerate of some of the special considerations that exist in Indian country. And by removing some of these barriers through the waiver process, it can really make a lot of these programs a lot more accessible. It can make the funding flow a little bit easier for that redistribution within Indian country. And we continue to ask for additional support. Those waivers can really allow for kind of a self-administration light or alternative models of service delivery that we talk about. And that's a really critical component to better meeting the needs of Indian country. That flexibility allows those programs to wrap around or to fit better into the way that we grow and work and operate within Indian country. And so I always want to make sure waivers are something that's considered when we're talking about, what that option looks like. tribes specifically have also been able, to support their tribal producers and their nations themselves by, getting in the driver's seat and stepping into that space of controlling their own destiny when it comes to food sovereignty through that tribal sovereignty lens. And whether that looks like vertical integration of internal processes, whether that looks like getting your infrastructure set up in order to not only serve, tribal ag business operations, but create capacity and access for your individual tribal producers to seek value-added options that may otherwise have been, too expensive or too costly or capital intensive for them to be able to easily afford to make that investment on their own. Or even addressing, some cost reductions for availability. And I'm thinking of, scenarios where tribes like Osage Nation have brought on meat processing facilities with, capacity to meet their own in-house needs for their own herd, but also, create capacity opportunities for processing for individual producers even outside of that operation. Some tribes host farmers markets. I'm also thinking of collaborative opportunities to redevelop our tribal trade networks. Like Menominee and Oneida were able to partner for the food distribution program on Indian reservations, sourcing options that have really incorporated local and tribal producers and provided that transfer of federal funds to be much more impactful to secure that food source and get into the pocket of our local and tribal producers that are benefiting from that allows that money multiplier to recirculate within those reservation economies instead of a lot of times the types of extractive production or operations that we see working in Indian country. We know a good percentage, sometimes well over 50%, sometimes even close to 90%, depending on the reservation, of ag production activities go off reservation ultimately. And we want to see more dollars be able to circulate on reservation economies and within Indian country. And economic development components really can step in and help address and retain a lot of those funds to better support not only tribal governments, but tribal citizens and tribal producers as well. In addition to, opportunities to incorporate tribal foods into programs, we also encourage USDA to leverage the Buy Indian Act and incorporate that into federal sourcing programs. That's going to be a critical opportunity that we hope can be recognized and brought to fruition to really make sure we're getting native foods onto native plates. I'm not tasked with talking about, some of the nutrition and, food considerations at this point, but we know that we have different, dietary needs and metabolic needs in Indian country just based on our demographic backgrounds. And getting traditional and culturally relevant foods into nutrition and feeding programs, especially those that are serving Indian country, is really critical to that long-term success, not only from an economic development perspective, but also from a health-based perspective. And just to kind of touch back on, self-governance and self-administration options, there's a variety of opportunities that exist in how we structure service delivery, whether that's, direct 638 self-administration, whether it's a waiver opportunity, whether it is an option for a tribe to, host a USDA local or county office, whether there's an opportunity to enter into an agreement for a tribe to house a federal employee that's specifically tasked with serving that tribe or that reservation population or community. There's a variety of ways that that alternative model of service delivery can really be impactful from an economic development perspective. And we know that the Farm Bill really can do a great job to provide that support so that more tribes can enter into ag economic, ag enterprise, food systems, and nutrition support, and really expand those offerings to create additional opportunities within the reservation economy. So economic development is a huge component. We're really excited to see that. But with that, well, I think that's a good transition to, as we're talking about waivers and self-governance, when we're looking at natural resources, in line with that, we definitely want to highlight alternative funding arrangements. The 2018 Farm Bill really kind of was reflective of this opportunity that was strengthened. We call them AFAs, alternative funding arrangements, were authorized under previous Farm Bill titles, but we saw a lot of teeth come through. the 2018 version. And we continue to advocate for the incorporation of alternative funding arrangements, which allows tribes flexibilities in natural resource conservation service programs when it comes to administration or accessing these programs. So again, that's another form of self-governance or self-administration, through an AFA that is better reflective of the needs and provides the flexibility necessary for tribes to be able to engage in programs or projects that really serve natural resources. And AFAs are a good match for tribal ecological knowledge. Some natural resource conservation service programs have a specific list of what conservation practices are authorized for cost shares or reimbursements. But we know that our tribal ecological knowledge may not necessarily be reflected in those lists. We may have some, specific knowledge regarding our longtime tenure on the land and our knowledge that's passed down from generation to generation, and how those conservation practices, those agriculture practices, those resource management practices can be really critical. And there's a potential for those to be incorporated through that flexibility through an alternative funding arrangement, or even a waiver option like we talked about earlier. And that can look like, just as an example, I like to toss this one out. As a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, I know that river cane is a large component of our, cultural perspective, but it also is a great tool to prevent stream bank accretion, and it provides mitigation to prevent that stream bank from, disintegrating or falling into that waterway. And so that's an example of, traditional ecological knowledge that could be incorporated into an AFA or a waiver through the NRCS process that wouldn't necessarily be listed as a practice, but could theoretically be adopted as a practice that would be eligible for a cost share reimbursement. So we continue to advocate for Farm Bill to be reflective of those practical opportunities. And through that Gaining Ground report, you'll see those recommendations be reflected throughout the titles that touch on natural resources. We know that Indian country has been in dire need of conservation practices for quite some time. The American Indian Ag-Resource Management Act that was passed in the early 1990s came after a report reflected that there are millions of acres of idle ag lands in Indian country that, based on that idle activity or challenges with accessing it, result in a lot of ecological situations that are not necessarily the best fit or preserve the health or value of those lands. And we know that there are some challenges with getting those lands enrolled into federal contracts or programs, largely due to the way that we hold land, fractionation issues, also length of lease terms that don't necessarily match up with length of lease or length of contract terms that are offered. So, flexibility in what those terms look like, how long they are, and making those programs fit for the way we hold lands and what our fractionation needs are and how we operate is really critical. And we want to make sure that we are including those policy points and priorities within that. Natural resource programs are also a good place to point out continued advocacy efforts with socially disadvantaged producers, which Native producers fall into that category. The conservation is really key to building, sustainable food systems for generations to come. And by addressing, improved cost shares or improved percentages of, guaranteed funding, set-asides, and additional technical assistance and availability of credit and program options for socially disadvantaged producers, or even specifically Native producers, is something that Gaining Ground report will reflect as you'll read through it. So we know that by providing additional considerations for socially disadvantaged producers, we'll continue to see that gap be bridged and make it easier for our tribal producers to see successes and reduce those barriers to access within Indian country, especially when it comes to natural resource stewardship opportunities. And with that, we can transition into rural development. I like rural development. I think there's a lot of really great opportunities within there. And like I mentioned before, Indian country, we tend to be a little bit more remote. We tend to be very heavily rural. And in many areas around the country, tribal governments are the strongest remaining rural government entity. As we've seen consolidation and, migrations from rural communities into more municipal or urban areas, our tribal governments aren't going anywhere. Our reservations are where they're at, and our tribal governments will continue to make investments and manage and even take over key elements of infrastructure like water and utility systems, electric, roads, even broadband, because there's not another capable or sound government or even non-governmental entity that frequently can handle the variety and multitude of those functions. Tribal governments continue to be an economic driver in rural areas, and frequently very competitive employers when we're thinking about how they operate compared to other industry. I know in Oklahoma alone, over 100,000 jobs, both directly and indirectly, can be accredited to our tribal governments and the work that's being done and the enterprises that are being invested in by our tribal governments. So we know that from a parity provision, we want to make sure that we add tribes and tribal producers alongside state or local governments or other entities in the actual language of the statutes that are contained within the Farm Bill. We've been excluded, and when I say we, I mean tribal governments have been excluded from accessing some programs or funds simply because we weren't in the list of people who were eligible. So we'll continue to seek parity through those programs, but and parity is really critical because we get left out, and we also are frequently having to seek funding or program options through the state, which we may have different policy priorities, or we may be able to work really closely together with that. But it's really critical to identify the needs in Indian country and eliminate those competition barriers, because we know that all boats rise when it comes to investment in rural development. We also know that we have different, demographic percentages when we're looking at infrastructure access. 12% of tribal homes lack access to safe drinking water and basic sanitation, which is more than 20 times the national average. That's a critical issue that needs to be addressed. As we continue to see aging infrastructure fail, especially when it comes to water, we know that there needs to be critical investments in that. And the Rural Development Title provides critical access to funding and programs that tribes have been able to leverage and access, and we'd like to continue to see that happen. We also know that 35% of Americans living on tribal lands lack access to broadband services compared to 8% of all Americans. And this directly ties into not only economic development, but also educational opportunities. Lack of broadband makes Indian country less competitive. It puts us behind the curve, and it makes it much more challenging to continue to support not only our indigenous producers, beginning farmers and ranchers, but also encourage educational opportunities for our young people that are interested in becoming involved in agriculture or fields related to agriculture, like land management, nutrition, or even professional degrees that serve Indian country through a food and ag lens. And so creating additional parity for broadband programs, access to infrastructure programs and funding, and also identifying opportunities to streamline processes for rural development financing in Indian country is really critical. I also want to point out that we continue to advocate for substantially underserved trust areas to be reflective of Indian country as a whole. That will create much more additional opportunity and will allow for better access to programs in Indian country. And Gaining Ground really reflects the opportunities that are available for rural development, that with the appropriate incorporation into Farm Bill, we'll see a lot more flexibility and progress in that field. And so Mary Bell, I'll kick that over to you.
Hey, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you short if you weren't ready to end the last slide.
Oh, you're good. You're good. Thanks.
Okay, so this is where you can find Gaining Ground online, nativefarmbill.com/gaining ground. I will type that in the chat, or if somebody could help me type that into the chat so people can just click on it and go, that would be fantastic. And then I wanted to open the floor for questions. So you can either put them in the chat or you can come off mute and ask a question. We're pretty flexible. Okay, we got the chat. Oh, thank you, Whitney, for sharing the link with folks. I do plan on sending out this recording to you all after it renders and we wrap up so that you can go back and look at this. And then we also have our launch for the public that's happening tomorrow from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern, 1 to 2 p.m. Central. So we're really excited to share this with the public tomorrow. So you're welcome to join then as well. I did want to also include some media contacts. And if you want to reach any of our other partner orgs or folks that have been involved, you can do that through Sarah. Sarah will make sure the appropriate people are reached out to. So does anyone have any questions? Hey, Erin, do you have any final comments that you might have?
It looks like William Wright may have a question. He has
Oh.
a 1 moment, please. It just popped up in the chat, so I'll wait.
Okay. Sounds great. Give William a moment. Or anyone else that might be a little shy right now.
I'll give you a softball, Mary Bell. If people are looking for ways to find more information, I see the media contacts, but what are some other resources to access to learn more about Native Farm Bill Coalition or the Gaining Ground Report?
Henry.
Yeah, so if you would want to follow us on social media, that's a great way to hear of anything that's happening, as well as our newsletter. We send out regular updates on what the Native Farm Bill Coalition is doing, as well as our website, nativefarmbill.com is another great resource. And we have webinars that we do for Native Farm Bill Coalition members and other outreach as well. We are going out and doing roundtables across Indian country. We've been doing that to help form this report, and we're going to continue to do that and build some more supplemental materials too. So as we realize some of the different priorities that may not have made it into Gaining Ground, we are putting this together so folks can see those as well as we go across Indian country. But those are some great ways to stay in touch, from social media to our website to tuning into our events. And if we're in person near you, that's another great opportunity to come to a roundtable and share that way.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Good afternoon. We're with NACNA, and one of our members would like to ask a question.
My name is Henry Travers. I come from Manitoba, Canada. I'm a food harvester. I'm a commercial fisherman, and I've been doing that all my life. But we have other issues relating to farming, and the province that I come from is Manitoba, but we don't have no assistance, no help for our Indian farmers where I come from. Even as a commercial fisherman, as a rights holder, and also we're not recognized in the food industry. The minute the farmers lose their crop, they automatically get subsidized. But us native people, we don't have that luxury, to fall back on. I just wanted to mention that, my tribe has been here for thousands of years, and they've always relied on farming before the newcomers came along. I don't know how much of that is recognized in your committee here. That was my question when I was sitting down listening to you. I'm not a very fluent speaker, but somehow as I get older, I'm a elder and a knowledge keeper where I come from, but also I'm a retired fisherman. Miigwech. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Miigwech for sharing. I know that it sometimes can be a little bit hard to stand up. So I appreciate you taking the time to share that with us. I was going to toss this over to Erin Parker from IFAI. I think that she might be a good resource to answer your question.
Sure, I can jump in here. Thanks, Mary Bell. And thank you so much for the question. I really appreciate you joining us today and for speaking. As Mary Bell said, I know it's not easy to get up in front of folks. So I thought it was a great question. You did a great job. I think that for this particular organization, the Native Farm Bill Coalition, we really focus on targeting United States federal law for the most part that's going to affect tribal nations who are within the boundaries of what is today the United States. However, in saying that, I do want to recognize that we know there are so many tribal nations who are within what is considered today the US, who historically, before that arbitrary boundary line was created by the British Crown and what is today the United States federal government, there were tribal nations and that are now First Nations people in Canada who existed on both sides of what is today a border that was never a border. And so that boundary line has been drawn between, in many places, tribal nations that historically have been bands or part of one people. There's a significant problem today getting the governments of Canada and the US to work together to get goods back and forth, sometimes between some of the programs we've been talking about today, between bands across that boundary line. Even though you're part of the same tribe, you're part of the same First Nation, our governments have an issue recognizing that and recognizing the sovereignty of that. So there are some actual recommendations within this report that even though they would only affect US federal law, would at least make it a little easier for some of those conversations to start happening between the US and Canada, particularly through the Jay Treaty as an opportunity, but also which facilitates trade between bands across the border without the issues that you might have otherwise. There's also an opportunity that we've highlighted in the report for the USDA here in our US federal system to stop to actually recognize food products sourced from sister bands across the international border as belonging to tribal nations and consider them domestic, because we can't source non-domestic products for things like the food distribution program. It's a regulation in the law. But if they would consider that for tribal nations, then you could have economic development opportunities as well, even across the border, if you're in a situation like that. So I think that's probably the most relevant place where this would definitely touch First Nations in Canada as well. But I wanted to highlight that.
Thank you very much for that.
Absolutely.
Okay, I just want to give folks one extra chance to ask questions before we wrap up.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm part of the Native American Church of North America, and I just had a couple questions about specialty crops. Do you have maybe any ideas or anything in your coalition about protecting the habitat of those specialty crops? Particularly, I'm asking about peyote.
Carly, would you maybe want to take this?
So I will do my best to answer this question. Within the Gaining Ground report, we obviously ag products are something that are focused on, but the Farm Bill also has to live in conjunction with existing federal regulation. While we know there's some flexibilities and there are considerations for conservation efforts to restore habitat and take steps to really address some of the environmental concerns that have resulted in some species reduction or elimination, especially within Indian country, and especially in a way that it can incorporate that tribal ecological knowledge. We're still bound by a federal law that would seek to regulate certain types of what the federal government, reviews as controlled substances. And so when we're looking at a lot of our Farm Bill titles, the identification of some of the policy priorities are based on what we've been hearing from our stakeholder groups. And our stakeholders are interested in food and ag products and how those can be better facilitated, how those can be made available. While hemp was a large discussion component of the 2018 Farm Bill, we hadn't heard the same kind of interest for other types of products with regard to some of the roundtables that we've had at this point. So I'll say probably not specifically for the species and products that you were discussing, but there are some considerations for habitat restoration and area protections for certain types of plants through conservation practices within that regard.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oops. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for attending today. We're at the top of the hour, so I think I'm going to go ahead and close it out for us. But if you want to get in touch, feel free, like I said, like us on social. There's some contact information earlier. You can reach out to us on our website. But thank you so much for attending today. We truly appreciate it. And we hope you have a great afternoon.